everyone, to another episode of Currently Speaking, the podcast of the Current Consulting Group. I'm Bill Current, president and founder of the Current Consulting Group. And today I'm joined by Jim Greer, who has a lot of different titles, which I'm going to have him take us through in a minute. But before we do that, we just want to invite you to like our podcast, subscribe to it. It's available on all the various podcast platforms. And if you'd like to listen to or watch past episodes, you can go to currentconsultinggroup.com, visit our archive of past podcasts, and you can access all of them completely free at currentconsultinggroup.com. But today, I'm excited to be joined by Jim Greer. Now, I know Jim in a lot of different ways. He's the chairman and really one of the driving forces behind the founding of NDASA. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But Jim, introduce our audience to you. I know you've got several different companies. Tell us about your business.
Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here today, Bill, for your listeners and viewers. Just to tell you a little bit about my business background, I'm the president and CEO of Accredited Drug Testing, and that is a drug testing and national TPA. We have clients throughout the country, about 3,000 clients throughout the country. And we do all types of drug testing, DOT drug testing and probation drug testing and so on. I founded that company about 11 years ago, but it wasn't my first drug testing business. I founded Florida Drug Screening in 1993 in the state of Florida, sold it in, I think it was around 2000, and started Accredited Drug Testing about 11 years ago that's been very, very successful. I have a couple other brands, as we call them. We have a company called Secure Screenings that helps people get into the drug testing business, sets up their lab accounts, sets up their drug testing software, provides consulting, and that has become very successful. A lot of people want to get into the drug testing business, particularly mobile drug testers. And then I also have another business that focuses on the clinical side, blood draws, and that is called Lab Testing USA. And while that company does do some drug testing, it's primarily health and medical side, clinical testing, tuberculosis, TB testing, sickle cell anemia, allergies, heart, and so on. So those are the three businesses that put the kids through college, as I say. And then I have several other hats that don't pay too well, but they're very, very rewarding to have. And being chairman of NDASA is one of those.
So before we get to NDASA, so you've got several companies. You're based in Florida, right? But these are national companies.
Yes.
Yeah, and you do business with companies of all sizes, all industries, et cetera.
We do. We have a call center that has about 40 people in it that takes calls from around the country to schedule drug tests. And then we have a DOT department that focuses on our regulated companies, truck driving, FAA, and so on. So, yeah, we service the nation.
So you've been in the drug testing world for a lot of years now. Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest changes or developments that you've seen since you first got into it in terms of providing services to employers and others?
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the first things is technology. I can remember back in the early 90s when I had some employees that sat there and faxed results constantly. Or, it's funny, I always tell my managers that back in the day, in the 90s, it would be good if someone got their result within 2 weeks because there was the U.S. mail and so on. Now people take a test and they want the result 3 hours later and don't understand why they don't have it. But in the old days, it took 2 to 3 weeks to get your results. So technology is probably the first. I think the culture, the business environment has changed over the years. In a lot of ways, drug testing became very prominent. It became a part of every business owner or most business owners' business model. And now you see it changing based on the culture of society today, particularly the political environment. So, the drug testing industry goes up, it goes down, that, and people view it differently on any given day.
So over the last couple of years, one huge development in our industry that seems to have gotten a lot of attention, continues to, are the DOT regulations coming out with final guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing. And I know NDASA has been very aggressive and active in providing information to the industry, training on oral fluid collections. I know that's something your company does as well. But what impact are those regulations going to have on our business going forward?
Well, I think the first thing it's going to do, DOT is looking at different testing methods for addressing cultural issues such as the transgender community, convenience to the regulated, safety-sensitive employee. So DOT is trying to move with the times, trying to adjust what they need to do to make sure that safety is paramount. However, um, you know, the question comes to be as DOT oral fluid has become available and will be available probably in January with the labs and everything. The detection period is less than a urine test. So there's a lot of questions about the direction that we're moving in. If public safety is so focused and needs to be our priority. I'm always questioning, the changes we make, are they ultimately for convenience? Are they ultimately to address one particular issue, but at the end it might affect public safety? I think I think the real issue that is going to happen with DOT is we have to make sure that public transportation and safety sensitive employees never get caught up in this cultural issue, never get caught up in, well, is drug testing good? Does it infringe on someone's rights? When it comes to public safety, there shouldn't be any question. Drug testing should be a part of that safety sensitive's responsibility. And I don't think DOT should ever get caught up in that. And there have been times where people have tried to pull DOT into that discussion of whether drug testing should occur or not occur.
So, excuse me, very interesting. This morning there was an article um, quoting the rock star Elton John on the whole subject of marijuana. He was recently named Time Magazine's Icon of the Year. And as part of his interview, he wandered into the subject of drug abuse and marijuana in particular. He's been drug free and for many years now, but was at one time a drug addict, and he admits that. But one of the things he said about marijuana is that he considers it a gateway drug that leads to addiction. And very importantly, he said it makes people who use it not think normally. And of course, employers, especially in safety sensitive industries, hire people to think normally and act normally. And marijuana, in the opinion of some people, interferes with that ability. And yet we're at a time when many states are legalizing marijuana for either recreational or medical use or both. And the DEA is considering reclassifying marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 as a controlled substance. What impact would that have, Jim, if DEA were successful in doing that? And what impact would it have specifically on drug testing and safety on American transportation ways?
Well, I think the question about marijuana and the legalization of marijuana and the effects that it has on people, the thing you have to remember is facts don't play a role in that discussion. It is a political discussion, and many political discussions don't have facts involved in the conversation. And anyone who argues that marijuana does not impair someone, it does not have an adverse effect on their ability to do their job, is just not realistic. They're not looking at the facts because they don't want to look at the facts. They're trying to accomplish an objective, and facts getting in the way will not allow them to get to that objective. Everyone knows that smoking marijuana impairs you. We all know that. We know that either from our personal experiences when we were younger, or we have someone close in our family, like I do, that uses marijuana, has used marijuana, and has not done great things in their life, number one. And second of all, it's very hard to get off the couch, as I say to my friends. The issue of marijuana is a populist issue. It is a issue that is driven by a popular belief that it's infringing upon someone's rights to tell them they can't smoke marijuana. And somewhere along the way in the political landscape, because government officials, elected officials, don't base their decisions much anymore on good public policy. They base it on getting reelected. And marijuana is a popular issue. It's a popular voting issue. Um, the facts and the concern for public safety has kind of gone out the window. And you're going to continue to see that until elected officials go back to the day where they were creating public policy based on facts and information. And marijuana is not in that arena right now. As far as public safety, we are being able to, and NDASA has really been holding the line on this, the leader on this. We are holding the line on keeping regulated employees tested for marijuana. We went up to DC. We've worked with Congress. We're challenging DEA's rescheduling of marijuana right now. So we're pushing back and we're winning right now on the federal level as it relates to public safety and the Department of Transportation. We are winning that argument today. We may not win that argument tomorrow, because there are still many people that run around Capitol Hill and say, why do you have to test an airline pilot for marijuana? It doesn't impair them. So why test them for it? You're infringing upon their personal rights to do what they want to do. And today we're winning the argument to keeping DOT testing for it, but who knows what tomorrow holds.
So if DEA were to reclassify marijuana, what impact, I know I'm asking for your opinion, but what impact would that have on the legalization of marijuana across the board? I know a lot of states obviously have legalized it, and yet it remains illegal under federal law. But would that bring down that final barrier if that were to happen?
No, because of the supremacy law. The federal government, as it relates to regulations and rules and laws that they create, supersede anything the states do. So as long as federal legislation doesn't tamper with the ability of DOT to test for it, we think it can continue. Now, there are some questions about that. If DEA and the federal government would move marijuana to a Schedule 3, there are some people on some sides that say that would prohibit DOT from continuing to be able to test marijuana as one of the 5 drugs that they currently test for. And then there are others that say, no, it can be, it's an executive order signed by Ronald Reagan that would continue to empower DOT to test. I think the best way to solve that problem, which is what NDASA has been working on, is making sure that any legislation that would legalize on the federal level, Bill, marijuana, there would be a safety carve-out in that law that would continue to allow DOT to test for marijuana. But it would require us every time a law comes up to make sure that that provision is in there. So you'd be chasing every bill that's filed every single day about marijuana on the federal level to put some language in there to continue to empower DOT to test for it.
Now, a safety-sensitive carve-out just seems logical. It seems like that makes all the sense in the world if you're going to go forward in this other direction. But is there opposition to that?
Yeah, there are groups that advocate, of course, for the legalization of marijuana across the board in every state, federal, and so on. And there are groups and there are people. I've met with some members of Congress that don't see a need for a safety carve-out. They don't understand if people can be able to smoke marijuana, why can't truck drivers smoke marijuana? Why can't police officers smoke marijuana before they put their gun belt on? I remember one conversation I had with a senator who I addressed the issue of going to the airport, an airline pilot smoking marijuana on the way to the airport. Did she not believe that that was a problem? And she flat out told me, no, she did not. She had very little time for me in the meeting. She was very clear. She did not believe in a safety carve-out. Now, that is not the majority right now. That is still the minority. People kind of, those groups and those people kind of roll over right now, and they accept the safety carve-out concept. because they have a bigger objective than messing around with DOT right now. But who knows what the future holds?
Now, you've mentioned NDASA a number of times. NDASA has been very active on this issue, and I want to talk about some of the advocacy priorities of NDASA. But tell us about NDASA. And let me preface your response by saying that I've been in the industry a long time, just like you have. And in the very beginning of my career, I was a consultant to the folks who started SAPA. And, back to Gary Glisson and Mac Allen and some of those guys. And so I saw how that organization got off the ground and has survived all of these years. But it's been a lot of years. NDASA is relatively still a baby, and yet it's come so far in such a short amount of time. As someone who's been in the industry a long time and has worked with other associations, it's truly impressive. Tell us about how NDASA came into existence and what its priorities are.
Well, NDASA, it is still a baby, but it feels like we've been around for many, many years.
Yeah.
A small group of people, myself included, met in Washington, D.C. back about 7 years ago. And we met for the purpose of forming a national association that was truly focused on its membership in the drug testing industry. It was going to truly be governed by its membership and its board of directors. And we put a list together of things we thought that the industry needed. From a membership standpoint, a nonprofit association providing services and benefits. And I think there was about 9 of us there, maybe eight or 9 people. We went into a conference room. We hashed it out over 2 days. Started out very early, went very late. And at the end, we had a national association called the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association. At the time that it was founded, I was the industry advisor and for governmental affairs, I believe, as I recall. And I supported the association with everything I could, from manpower, my staff, to financial help to get it going, along with some others. And Joe McGuire, who's now our executive director, she was the founding chairwoman. And we had a goal, Bill. We had a really focused goal of what we wanted this association to do compared to any other association that existed. And member-owned and member-driven was what our focus really was. And we came back from that meeting in D.C. and we hit the ground running. And Joe McGuire and I, with some other board members, started every day treating it like a job, where we wanted to go, what we needed to do today and what we need to do tomorrow. And lo and behold, it turned out that we became the largest trade association representing the drug testing industry. We now have thousands of members, and our budget now exceeds $1 million a year. And it was kind of funny because we didn't have a dollar back when we first started. My father used to have another saying, a pot to do something, but we didn't have any money in the bank, and now we have a budget of over $1 million. We have a board of directors, which you serve as a member of, who's very engaged, very focused, very active, and it's been a great success.
Yeah, and let me just add that I've been in the industry for a little over 35 years now. Long time. It's like, what happened? But one of the great honors of my career was to be elected to the board of directors last year by the membership of NDASA. And I'm truly impressed by the governance, if you will, of the organization. And I now have the privilege of serving as the chairman of the membership committee. And but what I found, Jim, and I'd like you to comment on this, is that I meet on a regular basis with the membership committee members, and it's like we're struggling just to keep up with the sort of organic growth of NDASA. It just seems like as people become aware of the organization and all the things that we do, they just jump on board. Now, I'm not saying that we don't want to continue to grow that. We do, but it almost grows itself in a way.
Well, I think there's a need. See, there's a need out there within the industry for education, for accreditation, for a place to go to ask questions, a place to go to ask for help. They also, I think the industry is really starting to embrace the fact that we're representing their interest in Washington, D.C. There was no entity, there was no association before we founded NDASA that was engaging the federal government and the stakeholders in DC, members of Congress, the executive branch, and so on, and representing their interests. And that's why we saw so much happening to the drug testing industry, whether good or bad. We didn't have a seat at the table. So, when I had the privilege of becoming chairman, one of my objectives was that we were going to have a political action committee. We were going to raise money to contribute to candidates. We were going to have a strong governmental affairs program. We now have a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., lobbying for our members and our association. And I think the reason our growth has occurred is, number one, we're focused on serving the members. Joe McGuire and I talk almost every day about what we can do, what are the new ideas. I take it to the board of directors. The board is very supportive of continuing to make sure that the members are our focus. So I think it all deals with the need. There was a need, and we filled that need. And every day, Bill, we as a board and as the leaders of the organization, we talk about what's the next thing that we need to do for our members. We're always being very progressive. I hate that word, but I'll use it here. We're very progressive in our thinking and our strategic planning, which, we just had a strategic planning session a couple months ago for the next 1, 3, and 5 years. We're always focusing on what is the current needs of our members and the future needs of our members.
So we've got a conference coming up in April 2025 in Jacksonville. What can we expect?
Well, I think this is going to be, number one, our biggest conference. I think we're going to have over 800 attendees this time. We have Joe Theismann, the gentleman who has had a lot of challenges in his professional career. He's going to be our keynote speaker. He's going to talk about overcoming challenges, personal and professionally. We're going to have a lot of training sessions for the industry. We're going to have our governmental affairs consultant, our lobbyist, is going to come make a presentation of what's going on in Washington, D.C. That will be my last conference as chairman. I'll be stepping down at the conclusion of that chairman after 6.5 years, but I'll remain on the board. And we have Mark Maxim, who's coming in as the incoming chairman after me. So it's just going to be a great conference. Every conference we've had, Bill, since our founding, we're just astounded at the end result when it's over. The members come up and say how much they enjoy it, how much we made them feel welcome. I think you and I over the years have gone to conferences where we didn't necessarily feel welcomed. We were kind of an outlier maybe because we didn't know people. Our board and our staff and our members have always made it a priority to welcome people there. So I think this conference, as all others, is going to be, we're going to knock it out of the park. And I'm looking forward to it. We also have Advocacy Day coming up in February. That's where we're asking our members to come to Washington, D.C. If you haven't done that, you get together in groups. It is a time, it's an experience that some people have said to me they've always envisioned doing this. And once they did it, they couldn't believe they were walking the halls of Congress. They were going in and meeting with congressmen. So we divide all the members that come to Advocacy Day up into small groups, about 5 or 6 people. They go into various members' offices. They talk to the staff. They talk to the members of Congress. They get a booklet of what are our issues, what are the things we want to bring up. So that is another event that we're having beside our conference in April that I encourage everyone to participate in.
Yeah, and I'll just say to anybody who was at the NDASA conference in 2020, right, in Jacksonville,
Yes.
That was a great conference. Remind us again, who were the keynote speakers? I think it was Miss America, wasn't it?
Miss America, my wife, who was very active in pageants, she got Miss America there. And we had Miss America. We had Mike Lindell, who is a business owner, owner of My Pillow, because he talks about his challenges with drug abuse. We have had a lineup of keynote speakers that have been impressive since the first one. Our very first one was Secretary Bill Bennett. If you remember him, he was the drug czar, and he was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education. And we've just had just a lineup of very interesting and very qualified speakers that everyone has really enjoyed.
And they're interesting speakers. They're big names typically, but they all have a connection to substance abuse in some way. They've either overcome it in their lives. They're very active in helping today. And I always find them to be very fascinating. In fact, the one last year, I don't know if you want to mention his name or not, but that was, or I guess this year, 2024, that was a surprising one to me. I mean, his remarks were very surprising. But they're all great.
Well, when when we started this association, Joe and I talked about keynote speakers, and and I said, and Joe agreed. I said, I've gone to conferences, and their keynote speaker is a comedian or he's an HBO star. And while I enjoyed, seeing the guy on stage that's on TV, I always wondered what connection it was to the event I was at. So we have really tried to have keynote speakers that could talk about issues that affected people's lives, the drug testing industry, how to run a business, how to overcome challenges in your professional and sometimes personal life. Um, Last year's guy, and I'm trying to think, was Roseanne Barr's former husband.
Oh, Tom Arnold. Yeah.
Tom Arnold, yeah. And, he had some great stories. I mean, he had some very, very interesting stories about drug addiction and about overcoming challenges. And and Joe Theismann, we looked at Joe and I have the opportunity to pick the keynote. We do it jointly together, and then we let the board know. And we always go down the list, Bill, and we try and focus on somebody that's going to have a message that our membership will like, not somebody that when they leave the room they'll say, "Why did they have this guy or gal?" And Joe Theismann we read his story, we saw the challenges he's faced, we watched him in videos making presentations at other conferences, and we said he's the guy.
Yeah, and for those who are football fans of football way back in the day, he suffered one of the most horrific injuries on the field, and you can see it on YouTube. But and then he came back from that, but it was it was not a pretty thing to see. I'm kind of looking forward to maybe hearing him talk a little bit about how he came back from that injury. But one of the things I want to say about the NDASA conference, because I've been going to conferences all these years, and two things. One is that I'll admit that I go to these conferences for the business connections, the opportunities, and they're tremendous at the NDASA conference. I mean, there are just so many people that you're going to want to meet with and talk to, and you oftentimes don't get to talk to people in person very often, but they're all there. All the major companies, all the big providers are there, and you get a chance to interact with them. And so one of the things that I found challenging about the NDASA conference, and this is a good thing, I suppose, if you're NDASA, is that I want to go to this workshop and this workshop and this workshop, but I also want to meet with this guy over here. And I'm trying constantly the whole week to choose between 3 or 4 all good things. And that's a good thing for the NDASA conference, but it's challenging for somebody who's going there to network.
Well, it is, and we try and we just addressed this recently in a call we had. We're trying to move the agenda around to accommodate that you just described, but the problem is you only have 2 days,
Yeah.
and everybody wants a session on this or a session on that, or a meeting on that, or Council of Laboratories or Governmental Affairs Committee, or I'm a big one on our members only meeting. And sometimes, I have to fight to make sure I get 30 minutes for the members only, because there are so many things that people are seeking and information that they want. But I do know, but we are trying to accommodate the time schedule as best we can.
Yeah, and one of the other things I want to mention is that at the Current Consulting Group, we have done a survey of the drug testing industry every year since I started the company in 1998. So in 2025, that will be our 27th annual survey of the drug testing industry. And it's been our privilege and honor to be able to release the results every year at the NDASA conference. And we hope and look forward to doing that again at the 2025 conference. So Jim, the last thing I want to ask you about is what you see the future of our industry looking like. I mean, there are some challenges, of course, but what do you think the industry future looks like?
Well, Bill, I get asked that quite often, and I've talked about it at our conference each year and our members only, and I raise it. I think our industry within the next probably not the next. Well, I don't want to say that. I was going to say not the next 4 years, but I think our industry at some point in time we're going to find ourselves in a real battle. A real national discussion is going to take place about drug testing. I think that once the advocates for marijuana get done with the marijuana issue, I think they're going to possibly attack the entire premise of drug testing in the workplace. And I think the industry as a whole has got to be prepared for that. Um, I talked about two things, two areas of experience that I've had over the last 30 some years. Uh, and one was I bought a polygraph company that you've heard me talk about. I'll talk about that one first. And it had 3 locations, and it had a lot of business, and it had a lot of employers that were clients and large chains, retail chains, and others. And I was so happy. I was very young. I was in my 20s, and I'd finally scrounged up enough money to sign the papers, not pay, but sign the papers that I would pay to own a drug testing company. And about a year later, uh, Senator Ted Kennedy introduced a law out of the blue, just out of the blue, proposed by the unions, which is fine. That's what unions do, particularly in that field. Proposed a law to eliminate the ability of the private sector to do polygraphing, and it got a co-sponsor and moved through Congress very quickly. Um, and it was signed by the president. And next thing I know, I was prohibited from doing polygraph. I remember I had to call the landlords of the buildings and say I can't pay the rent lease anymore. They've they've not just affected my business; they have put me out of business. And I think that's important to realize that segment there. They didn't just write a law that maybe would have curtailed my business or I would have had to adjust to the new law. They wrote a law that the business that I was in was no longer legal. Another industry that in the 80s and early 90s really started being attacked was the alcoholic beverage industry. And there was a movement to impose liability on manufacturers of alcoholic beverage for a crash out on the road. Not only would you sue the person who crashed into you, you could sue the restaurant or the bar that sold it to you, and then you could go to the distributor, and then ultimately there was a movement to go to the manufacturer. And I remember I was in a meeting in Texas where some of the beer distributors or beer manufacturers got together, and one of the nationally recognized manufacturer owners, whose name is attached to the beer, he stood up in the room and he said, "This has to end. I will write the check, no matter how much the check needs to be, to hire the people in Washington to stop this." I was in that room when he stood up and did that. And I think he wrote a $500,000 check to start with. And other people wrote big checks too. And they hired the right people. They got good information in front of members of Congress, accurate information, factual information, and they put a stop to that movement going after the manufacturers. I see the drug testing, not to belabor this, but I see the drug testing industry having a battle someday that we need to be prepared for. And if we're not, we may very well see on CNN that there's a bill moving through the House of Representatives to prohibit workplace drug testing.
Hmm. Wow. And if that happens, then we have to be ahead of that curve. And I think that's what that's why NDASA exists, to not get caught off guard by some type of legislation that would, and the fact of the matter is, and I've written on this extensively over the years, that drug testing works. It helps identify people who need help on the one hand, but also deters drug use. It deters people who are drug users from even applying for a job with your company. And so if you're in lots of different industries, but industries with safety sensitive occupations, you have a legal obligation because you can be held responsible for the behavior of your workers who are within the scope of work impaired by, say, marijuana and driving a delivery van, and suddenly, something catastrophic happens. You as the employer can be held legally liable for their behavior. And if you're not allowed to do drug testing, you've eliminated one of the strongest tools you have in your toolbox to not just prevent accidents, but to secure safety. And I think that's what it comes down to. I know employers drug test for lots of different reasons, Jim, and safety is always at the top of the list, or to comply with federal regulations, et cetera. But if you take that away from employers, I think that we'll see, and we're already seeing an increase in post-accident positivity rates. We saw that in the Quest Drug Testing Index that was also released at the NDASA conference last year. We've seen a 25-year high in post-accident positivity over the last, 25-year high, but increasing along with and in alignment with the legalization of marijuana in so many states. The two go hand in hand together. You legalize marijuana, you get more marijuana users, they end up in workplaces, and invariably we've seen the result being unsafe workplaces.
Well, you're right. And you brought up a very good point, Bill, that I think the industry needs to adjust its public perception made by people, and that is that it doesn't have to be punitive. It doesn't have to be for the purpose of punitive actions. It can be for identifying someone who has a drug problem and needs help. And I think that our industry has really got to look at what is our, how do we present ourselves to the country and to the business communities and the chamber of commerces and the worker. And one of the ways that I would like to see in NDASA's new foundation that the board, including yourself, that supported the creation of this foundation is I just put together, and I'll be presenting to the board soon, some ideas of what the foundation could do. And one of those is a public campaign about substance abuse and how drug testing working together helps solve the issue of drug abuse. And I really believe that we've got to find a way for people to look at drug testing differently. And one of those ways is exactly what you said. It's identifying the person who needs help. And one of the ways you do that is by drug testing. You can have the segment of public safety that there can't be any room for negotiation. You can't have an airline pilot using drugs. So you can't negotiate that. But in the other parts of the workforce, you can, even there too, you can identify someone who has a drug problem, who's addicted to drugs, and the drug test has made us aware of that. So how do we help them? If we didn't have the test, we didn't know he had a drug problem. And that is something that the industry could start looking at how to present itself. Because we're going to have to find better ways to argue why drug testing should occur in the workforce.
Well, Jim, thank you very much. Just fascinating. Love your opinions and love your insights. So much going on, and I agree with you. I think we're heading toward a sort of a critical crossroads in the history of drug testing and the drug testing industry. And NDASA will certainly play a very important part in how that future unfolds. If you're interested in learning more about Jim Greer and Accredited Drug Testing and all of his other companies, Jim, where can they contact you? How can they get a hold of you?
First of all, they can contact me at jim@accrediteddrugtesting.com is my email. They can call me at 800-221-4291. If they want to find out the great things that NDASA has to offer, they can go to NDASA.com. Stands for the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association. There's all kinds of membership categories there and resources that they can find. But either through Accredited Drug Testing or through NDASA, they can get a hold of me.
Okay. Thank you again, Jim. If you'd like to watch or listen to past episodes of Currently Speaking, go to currentconsultinggroup.com, visit our podcast archive page. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms. And this concludes another episode of Currently Speaking. Thanks for joining us.